Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is import the project I've given you, and then we can get started. Now, it is not as easy as double clicking, as we've already established. Yeah, we have an internal database and we have a different kind of project file that we're using. I have given you what is called a DaVinci Resolve archive file. That contains the project, but also all of the media contained within it. Everything that was open and being used in the project as I prepared it on my end is included in that .dra folder that you have by now hopefully downloaded. So let's go over how we do this. I'm in my new database and I'm going to right click in this empty space here and I'm going to choose Restore Project Archive. I am looking for this Jim Candy demo project.dra folder. Ignore this down here, you will have just this highlighted item. You will need to extract it from the zip file that you downloaded before this will work. You can't open a zip file like this. An archive is not the same as a zip file. You just need to click on this to highlight it and choose Open. When you do that, you have to give Resolve a minute, and then it will go through, it will restore the project, and it will relink all of the contained media. Now we'll go through some more troublesome ways of opening up a project later on in the course as I prepare new modules, but for now I wanted to keep it simple. We just do it this way. We can now open this project by double-clicking. And here you will see that I've gone through and I have prepared a lot of material for you to work with on this project. So this was a dead simple one, and opening up an archive is dead easy, but obviously an important step. Wouldn't do for me to just cut to an easy open project whilst you didn't know how to do that. So in the next one, we're going to take a look at setting up our preferences within Resolve. So click on through to the next lecture once you're ready. Right, let's take a proper look at this panel. The media panel is where we manage our assets and get everything into place before we start the fun stuff. It's extremely important, and all new projects start by bringing your material into Resolve through the media panel and making sure the project is organized properly before we proceed to the edit, effects, sound, or grade panels. So let's get started and take a look around. Now, like I said in the previous lecture, if you cannot see what I'm seeing right now, go down to the bottom of the screen, and on the left hand side there is an icon that looks like a landscape painting. Left click that and you will be taken to this media panel. Now, you may or may not have some additional columns on the right hand side here. I do. I can shut these down by going up to the top right, and clicking anything that's highlighted in white up here, in this case metadata and audio. We'll talk about those in due time, don't worry. Now we can already see a few windows populated with data, and we've already interacted with our bin list. So on the left hand side we have where all of our bins are located, and the bins are essentially just folders in our projects. I can unfold these, I can click through, I can click and highlight one of these, and then in the media pool, this window down here, lower center, I can see all of the rushes and different items I have in that bin, and I can left click on one of these and it will open up in the preview monitor, which is the name for the screen or the monitor up here. Now, by default, Resolve likes to show you thumbnail mode. I don't personally like using that a great deal. So if you want to change from thumbnail to list mode, on the right hand side, more or less around the middle of the screen, just underneath the preview monitor, there are three icons, and we have thumb, metadata, and list. For now, just left click list and we will see our rushes in list mode. So now let's take a look at the preview monitor. This monitor lets us review our clips and assets either before or after we have imported the file into Resolve. We can go through our clips here and make notes or just get a feel for our footage. Now, if I left click anything in the list, it will highlight, it will become active, and it will open up in the preview monitor. Now I can hit spacebar and it will play, or I can click on this white bar here, which is called the playhead, and I can drag right or left, and this is called scrubbing through our footage. Now, to the left of the preview monitor, we have the file finder and file hierarchy. This window and the leftmost column next to it allow us to navigate all the locations on our workstation and then import the files we find into Resolve or to review them first. So I'll just open up my D drive. I will go into Film Projects, Generic Assets, and look, there's my logo. I can left click to open it up in preview, and then if it were footage, I could play or I could scrub through. And I can simply left click and drag in to import it if that's what I want to do. There are other windows here, but we will cover them as they become relevant over the next few lectures. For now, we have a decent enough grounding in how to navigate the media panel. So take a little time to look through the footage I've given you. This is extremely important. Good editing comes from familiarity with the material, and you'll hear that phrase a lot in this course. So click on through to the next lecture. Right, so in this lecture we're going to talk about shot angles, because let's assume that you have no editing experience. We need to start right with the very basics. What is a shot angle and how do we use them in editing? Let's take a look at this. So we have three main angles that we work with in editing, well, in all film, really. We typically have a close-up, a mid, and a wide, and then we have different variations on those shots and all of those different kind of framings of shots. So let's take a look at the first. Let's look at the close-up. So the close-up, as the name implies, typically shows only the character's face from forehead to chin. It's a very close-up angle. It makes facial features very easy to read, and that's very good for clearly showing a character's emotional state. We very often cut into closer angles when we reach a kind of dramatic or emotional peak in the scene. That way, we really get the emotional impact of what is going on, and the emotional beat of the story is most effectively communicated to the viewer. And there are two main variations on this. We have the MCU, and no, that's not Marvel Cinematic Universe. It stands for medium or mid close-up. And that's a little bit wider than a standard close-up. It normally shows a character's shoulders and chest as well. And depending on who you're working with, you might find that things that you could argue are middle close-ups or medium close-ups are labelled as standard close-ups as well. It just depends on how that person marks up the shots. What you'll find is a lot of things in this project, you could argue that they're MCUs, but I've called them close-ups because we don't have much variation between the two. It's quite a simple project, this one. And the last variation on this angle is the extreme or big close-up, respectively known as the ECU or the BCU. They are both the same thing, right? Different terms for the same thing. It's a very, very close angle, and it's normally so close that you only see a character's eyes or whatever facial feature you happen to be kind of focusing on. They're not used very often. They normally come across as being quite stylized, or maybe there's something very extreme happening and you just want the emotional expression of the eyes going on, which is why we might use that angle. They're not very common, okay? We don't use them all the time. So that's the close-up, and believe me, we're going to be working with lots of those. Next, let's talk about the mid-shot. So the mid shot, and that's denoted by the letter M, is a shot that typically shows the characters from the waist up. Now, the labeling between close-up and middle and close-up can be a bit subjective, as I've already said, but a middle shot should be like this. It should be what you see here, waist up. That's a middle shot, right? It's a good angle for showing two or more characters in dialogue or action, provided that that action is not too extreme. Obviously, if they're kind of fighting or flipping around or whatever, then they're going to move out of frame, and we want to avoid that. So this is good for cutting out of a close-up exchange if one of the characters has some important action that they have to deliver. Take, for example, this offering the money here. This is a good excuse to cut from close-ups back to a mid, because in the mid we can actually see what our main lead character, who's called Wayne here, what he's actually doing with the money. Whereas if we stayed in on a close-up, what we would get is he's kind of fumbling around with his hands off camera, and it would just look weird. And it's always important for things not to look weird. It's important for action to be readable, as well as the emotional states of the actors. And also, one last note on the mid shot is that they can be referred to as either 2 shots or 3 shots or whatever, depending on how many characters you have on screen at any given point. And no, that doesn't extend to the Battle of the B-Words on Game of Thrones. They didn't have like 2,000 shots on there, right? A mid shot, it's normally either a 2 or a 3 shot. You could, in extreme circumstances, have a 4 shot if you had a lot of characters there, or if it was like an identity parade or something. It's mostly just 2 shot and 3 shot, because we mostly have a maximum of 3 characters on screen in a middle shot angle. Okay, so let's recap on that. Mid shots, they're good for showing 2 to 3 actors at once. We get a much clearer read of actors moving around and important action of the on these shots. So it's a very good angle to cut out of close-ups to then show some action taking place. And the last, but certainly not least angle we're going to talk about is the wide shot. Now, a wide shot will show entire characters from head to toe, or will be a very wide, zoomed out shot of a landscape or some kind of location, or, you know, a shot that's wide enough to, let's say, show the entire White House, if you wanted to then cut in to a mid shot of 2 politicians talking to each other, right? You'd establish that location with the wide of the White House, then move in politicians kind of, you know, talking important politics, whatever. Wide shots are also called long shots, and they can be denoted by the letters W or L, depending on who you're dealing with. And they're best used when you have some extreme action taking place. Let's say there's a car chase. Getting a close-up of a car driving along the road, it's going to be in frame for, let's say, a second and a half, right? So you have a wider shot, then we get a much cleaner read of the action that's going on. The emotional impact here is decreased because we're further away from the actor's face, and the face is the most emotive, most relatable part of the human body, right? So it's not a great one for emotional impact, but it is a very, very good one for establishing location, showing extreme action, showing wider action, or maybe there's some kind of special effect or practical effect or composite or something, like there's a meteor shower or an explosion or a fire, and the wider angles are much better for showing that kind of thing. Now, because faces are hard to read from a distance, sometimes it can make it possible to swap the dialogue from one take out into a wide shot if you're having trouble choosing your favourite performance. This doesn't happen all the time, only on occasion, right? Don't go and think you can do this all the time. It can work, but not always. And if you want to get the most out of a verbal performance, but you think all the close-ups look a bit odd, what we could do is we could cut to a wider shot and we could kind of fake it by swapping out the dialogue. We do that at one point in the upcoming editing project. Wide shots are very commonly used at the start of a scene as what we call establishing shots. An establishing shot establishes the location, like the White House shot that I mentioned earlier. What we would do, and particularly in British style editing, what we do is we start with a wide of a building or a location, and we're telling the viewer, right, this story is happening in this location. I'm showing you a wide shot of a London Tower block. Maybe it's a very low angle, but it's wide enough to include the entire London Tower block, yeah? So then I know that if I cut into a medium of two people talking in a room, then I'm inside the tower block and we have two tower block tenants talking to each other. So that's how we establish place and location in our story. We want to do this obviously because it's very confusing if we don't do it. We definitely don't want to just kind of cut into a close-up in some kind of nondescript room with two people having a dramatic argument, because we have to do a bit of setup first. We do have to let our viewers know what is going on, where it is, because the location of the story is, of course, important, right? There's one last thing to cover with the wider angles. It's not uncommon, we don't do this all the time, but it's not uncommon to cut to a wider angle for a comedic punchline, as this often makes a lot of action easier to read. Very, very few of Buster Keaton's punchlines were delivered in close-ups, right? So what we do is we cut to a wide, maybe there's a car crash, maybe somebody's doing a pratfall, maybe something weird is happening. When we cut to the wider shot, we can actually see that comedic action happening. So wide shots are, like I said, commonly but not always used to deliver a comedic punchline. Conversely, very often for tragic beats and very emotionally involved story beats, we use close-ups. Again, typically but not always. Cool. So this was a nice little primer in the 3 basic angles that we work with during an edit, and we are going to be working with all of them a lot in this next edit, so you will get a real feel for all of them. So what I want you to do now is click on through to the next lecture once you're ready.